So, alright, you lovely lot, welcome back to NE1's Mental Health Podcast with me, Ray Elliott, and my good pal, Sam Warner. Alright, Sam?
Aye, champion.
Champion. Alright, Bonnie lad. How's things?
Good. Really good.
All good.
Really good.
So we've had a little bit of a spell off for one reason or another, but we're back today with a bang, and we're absolutely delighted to be joined by Richie Paxton. Richie, how you doing?
I'm very well. Good. All good.
Richie, you are a counsellor, a coach, champion, gambling addiction and recovery, host of the Recovery Toolkit podcast. Do you want to give us a little bit more of an intro? Have I missed anything off there?
Yeah, thanks for having us first and foremost. I think it's always good to have the opportunity to talk, especially when it can add value to people's lives. That's what I'm all about, is how can I be the best version of myself, which will hopefully offer hope and inspiration to other people so they can be the best version of themselves. And that's kind of what I pride myself on doing now. But as you say, I'm a qualified counsellor, qualified recovery coach, 20 years working in health and fitness is kind of my background, PT, boot camps, all that sort of stuff, and then through all of that, that's what I presented as, being this guy who's got his shit together and looks after everybody else's health and well-being. And on the inside, I was a car crash, absolute car crash. So 20 years struggle of addiction, it was gambling addiction initially, and that manifested itself in alcohol and drugs as well. So had a bit of an 18-year battle with it, really, which, the last 6 years of that was massive suicide ideation, just didn't want to be here anymore, was looking for ways out. And then on the 19th of March 2018, I took myself to Tyne Bridge to jump off, and luckily somebody stopped. Well, somebody stop us, or I was in limbo. I wanted to do it, I didn't want to do it, and a woman stopped us. And she said these words to us, which I think are quite profound. But she said, "I don't know what's going on in your life, son. You might feel like dying today, but I don't think you want to die for the rest of your life." And that was the thing that made me
That's so
completely powerful. Break down, tears, snots a lot on the Tyne Bridge, and that was the best day of my life.
And I guess that summarised how you were feeling. It's in that moment you were maybe lost in that moment that you were in. But ultimately, there's a lot to live for, isn't it? And that's a powerful message.
Yeah, definitely. I at that point, I had 2 young kids, and I thought when I turned 28, kind of Theo came along, who's my oldest child now. And at that point, I didn't know how to look after myself, so I was so shit scared of looking after a child that I just thought, the world would be a better place without us. And that was the internal struggle that went on. I will say, like, when I was 18, I had a little boy called Dylan who unfortunately didn't make it. He died.
Sorry to hear that, Richie.
And before that, I played football. I was involved in professional football, and I lost that career. And them 2 things happened like 3 months apart, and that was like the start of the snowball.
How old were you then, Richie?
18.
18.
Yeah, so I've emotionally avoided everything in my life, and after that, I didn't know how to handle feelings and emotions. This is what I know now. Didn't know that at the time. But what I know now is I really struggled with feelings and emotions. And, I can even go back further into childhood and stuff like that. And you can see where the behaviours come from.
That was going to be my question is, what was that background for you?
Growing up, always was quite clever, quite clever in lots of ways, struggled in some others. So struggled with interaction, struggled in social isolation, struggled with spelling was the big thing. Couldn't spell for shit, and a few years ago I was told dyslexic, diagnosed dyslexic, which made a lot of sense. That's why you cannot spell, do you know what I mean? That's why you struggle with English. But at the time it was like, well, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I can't do this, I can't do that. And from a very young age, I was always focusing on the things I couldn't do rather than the things I could. I was quite clever, math, science, and them subjects that got me interest. So I was able to do them no problem. And then I really excelled at sport. So sport was my thing, and sport in me childhood, what I now know is sport was the escape. You know, it was the thing that I would run away to. I excelled at everything I'd done at sport because I was just so driven to be liked.
And the affirmation that comes through it, and the
Yeah, 100%. It where do you get value from if you've got none inside of you?
What about your folks? What was your relationship like with your folks?
Folks really good. My dad probably didn't show emotion, you know, and probably still doesn't, but that's a generational thing, you know, blokes in the Northeast and all that sort of stuff. But he was the most caring person in the world, but he just showed care and love in other ways. You know, he would take us all over the country to play football. He would ship us about. He'd do anything for anyone, my dad, you know, and he still does. And that's his way of showing love, you know. And my mum, you know, she's very similar to me. We clash a lot. But she's all she's ever tried to do is the best for me. And so I couldn't say I had a bad childhood because I didn't. But my childhood wasn't the external family environment I was in. It was the internal battle because the self-worth that I struggled with.
And that's a really interesting point and something I can really level. I was a very anxious child, and that inner monologue for children that are maybe you know, have dyslexia or neurodiverse. There's been a number of studies, hasn't there, about how many times they have heard discouraging words or maybe put downs that people don't really know they're doing at the time, but more so than like a neurotypical child. You know, you can't do this, or you're not good at that, and that creates that inner monologue, doesn't it, from being a child, where you're just constantly doubting yourself, and you know. And that can be really damaging going into adulthood. And that's something I've realised now as an adult, that still plays in my brain a lot. You know, that constant nagging doubt. You're not good enough to do this. You can't do this. And, you know, and that constant anxious brain that I have, and trying to differentiate what is an anxious thought and what is reality is a big thing for me, and something I've had to separate as an adult. And it's not the easiest thing to do when you've lived with it for so long. You know, and that's something I still struggle with this day. We were just talking about it the other day, weren't we, Sam? And I think over this past month, I've not been drinking at all. I've been like really mindful about sleep and everything. I've found myself in this place where the anxiety's been lessened, but I've been uber aware of that constant running monologue in my own brain that I've had from being a kid. You know, those constant nagging doubts and phrases that are always there, and trying to just work through them is a really difficult thing. It's exhausting at times as well.
It is. I think something you mentioned there just makes us think, for me, the number one thing that you have in life is the relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and ingrained in a lot of people is an unhealthy relationship with themselves from childhood, for whatever reason that might be, you know. And I work with lots of people now, and we identify, you know, lots of things around unmet needs basically as a child, and unmet needs can come in so many different ways, shapes and forms. And a lot of people want to focus on like those big traumatic events in life, but actually it doesn't need to be, you know, because just not having a cuddle on a night when you're a child, or a bedtime story, you know, and other kids at school having bedtime stories, you feel like you're missing out on something, and then you internalize it. And as children, everything that goes on around you, you're the center of the universe. So as a child, you know, so everything you make it everything about you. And when you're not getting them things as a child, and it could be simple things, you know, it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't have to be big, massive traumatic events. It's how do we internalize that? And if you're already struggling, because for me, in my circumstance, I couldn't spell, then everything's massive, you know, catastrophized from a very young age.
Do you know what it is? We said exactly that this week. Ray had disclosed what he just said there. We were having just a personal chat, as we do in the week, and he'd mentioned what he just said there. And as you've alluded to, and we're going to get dug into your 18-year battle with it, and I've had mine as well, what I came to the conclusion of is exactly what you just said there, is trauma being this big thing, these incidents that, you know, yourself has been through as an 18-year-old man who's going to have a baby, and then the baby didn't make it. That's a traumatic event but it's those little things you said every day. And I think I said to you, Ray, is like a big part of my evolution and my understanding of myself now is that I'll carry that internal dialogue that I've got, I'll carry that forever now. I'm chipping away at myself all the time. But with my kids, and I think I said to you, Ray, was like the little things. I said, your kids come downstairs and see you cuddling their mum, your wife. they come home from school with a picture they've drawn and you're present and you look at that picture and you say that's brilliant, and it's those little everyday menial things, dad baths you or whatever it is, that are, on the one hand, that's you steering your children in a direction hopefully where they don't feel those feelings to the level that you did, but also it's some return for you as well, isn't it? You know, like that's how I feel anyway. And we just were talking about that. So I love what you said there, because it is those simple little things that we take for granted, just being with your kids.
The big thing now is, isn't it, on your phone when kids are talking to you, and I've done this so many times where my kids will say, Dad, look at this, Dad, and they'll say it 5 times, and my wife will say, Ray, he's asked you 5 times, and I'm looking at some nonsense on my phone, if I'm honest. But that is almost like that's
exactly it.
Yeah, I know it seems like an insignificant thing.
But this is exactly it. It's those tiny things that build up in a child. For a kid, that's huge.
Well, in that child's mind, you're basically portraying that thing in your hand is more important than that child, isn't it? And that's something I'm having to be uber aware of.
And then the child's got to try and find a way to get your attention. You know, and a lot of kids will play up, you know. Of course. They'll be naughty, whatever naughty is now. Do you know what I mean? Like, if a child's playing up, a child's playing up. Do you know what I mean? But they play up in lots of different ways, or they might go down a different path and want to excel in something, or do you know what I mean? There's lots of different ways children try and get attention from parents, and you know, like you say, if you're not giving them that attention, how do they get it? You know, and they're quite creative. You know, let's look at the
digital. That's interesting that you've used digital, because I'm a big believer. Like, my wife and I had exactly those feelings Ray's just talked about, and we realised, you know what, I can't be scrolling through Instagram anymore. If I don't want my kids doing that, I can't be like, in a minute, Sonny, Dad's fucking watching these women in Miami doing fucking muscle ups. Do you know what I mean?
Beach volleyball.
Do you know what I mean? And it is. It's huge. Yeah. But then, like you're saying, Richie, about, well, what do the kids do then? I would argue, like, in those situations, sort of across the board, kids are either going into their phones or their tablets, and they're being brought up, not by you now because you're busy doing this, they're being brought up by the influences they're finding in there.
Yeah, 100%. We just had a guest on our podcast a few weeks ago that talks about this aspiration culture that kids find themselves in now. Yeah. And back in my day, I used to watch a TV show and I used to have to wait a week before I could see the next half hour of that TV show.
Long-term gratification.
You know, and now it's there 24/7. They drip-fed this stuff 24/7. And my kids, you know, 9 and 11 now, they're watching all these YouTubers who've got fancy cars and designer clothes and £1 million houses and throwing, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds
fighting
around.
Mike Tyson.
Fighting Mike Tyson. You know, and that's what they do, and that becomes their norm, and that's what they're striving for. But then this relationship that they have with them is one way, isn't it?
Totally, you know? So and it's contrived, it's fabricated, isn't it?
It's the algorithm, bullshit, isn't it? It's bullshit.
Like, what are the kids? Which video got the most views? Oh, it's the one where we smashed the Lego house down with all whatever.
Yeah, and someone wins £1 million. Yeah, let's give £1 million away. Like, it's just no. Do you know what I mean?
But that's a great point, Richie. Because you can't. Like, I often, and listeners to this podcast who are regular will hear me fucking banging on about this a lot, right? And I'm not a Luddite. I'm absolutely not a Luddite. But I think coming back to what you're saying about. That is the world. The digital world is there. But as long as you harness them in the physical world with your presence for the main, then that's fine. Because that is the world. But they need to be anchored in reality, in presence, in safe, seen, secure, soothed by their home people. The people
100%. I think we've got to meet kids where they're at.
Yeah.
I think that's the most important thing, is meeting them where they're at, because... You go and you say, oh, you've only got an hour screen time, or you've only, you know, you limit this or you limit that, and because that's what we think's right for them. But what you're doing is, you know, you're creating barriers to their friendship groups. Do you know what I mean? Like, all their friends are online, all their friends are doing that sort of stuff. So by creating these barriers, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be any boundaries in place, there should be, but sometimes we go too far as adults because that wasn't the culture that we were brought up in. So we think it should look something different.
And things move on rapidly, don't they? And this is something that I'm really wrestling with at the moment, and I'm sure both of you guys are as well. I mean, your children are a little bit older than mine, but it's remaining present with what's happening today. Like, honestly, even my 5-year-old, if I let him on, like, watching videos on YouTube Kids or whatever, YouTube, and stuff comes on, and I'm just like, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
And he's on it, eh? He's absolutely on it.
Understands, yeah.
He gets it, and I'm saying to my wife, like, even apps, you know, like Snapchat and TikTok. I'm not on those apps, but I'm thinking, how should I be? You know, because they're constantly moving, constantly evolving. Do I need to know about that? Because you're gonna blink, aren't you? And then something's gonna come about that you're gonna really need to know that's got potential. That's gonna be really damaging. Yeah. And I just feel like I'm gonna be lost. You know?
Yeah, I mean, just a conversation. My 11-year-old last week was like, "Oh, what are you gonna do when you're a bit older?" You know, and I'm going to do a bit of drop shipping, Dad.
He's going to do what?
Drop shipping.
Drop shipping. Yeah.
You know, and I'm probably going to have a YouTube channel and that. And then he was like, and if all else fails, I'll set up my own company and that, and like we'll do VPNs and stuff, and we'll get people to change their VPNs. And I'm thinking, hold on a minute. You know, what's this 11-year-old kid
Richie,
going on about?
Educate me, because I don't know what drop shipping is.
Well, drop shipping's like how people sell stuff on Amazon. Do you know, they go and buy stuff and then send it off to Amazon, and Amazon will sell it for them.
Yeah.
You know, so like you go into Costco and
Sounds
you buy all
easy.
the stuff that's like a reduced rate, but then you put it on Amazon, you sell it on Amazon at an increased price, basically.
But it's
and that's
interesting,
where they
isn't
make
it?
the money. But
That's just on a thought there, Richie. So the ingenuity that can come is amazing.
Unbelievable.
But the physicality, the problems physically, like, because you're doing all that from your bedroom, right? So you're not going out in the world, you're not going out into the interview space, you're not going into the workspace with different characters, different personalities. You might be able to make a load of money from your back bedroom, but then you're going into that kind of weird superficial realm that is like, well, this is good this month, so we'll go with that because that's selling and that's got return and there's adulation and there's all the things attached to it, but you're in your room on your own and you've got to go and get some milk from the shop, and your primal brain is going to see people, things, traffic, movement, and just like can't register it. And that's a real fucking dilemma I think we're seeing with the young people now.
massive, isn't it? I think, you know, as we go into my story a little bit, you'll probably find that connection was the thing that lacked huge. And connection with myself first and foremost, and that then caused an inability to connect with other people. And coming out of professional football, I went into like non-league football and all that sort of stuff, so I was constantly surrounded by people and I had loads of people in my life, but I couldn't connect. And I think that's going to be the struggle for a lot of people, especially kids now moving into what we see as the AI world that we're going to belong to in some way, shape or form. Maintaining that social connection is so important, and it has to be on not just on a superficial level. You know, we need to be able to connect with other human beings on a much deeper level than most of us have the ability to do.
And understanding we're all different, because in that digital realm, it's partisan, isn't it? It's like, it's black and white, it's binary. You're either on the left or the right, or you're into this channel or that channel, or this guy and that guy. Whereas in the world, people are different, and you get along, don't you? You have to get along with people. Not my kind of person, but we're all in this campsite together. Their kids and my kids. Brilliant. They're all getting on. You know, like, you have to... that part of us is lost in the digital realm.
I think that's the attraction, though, isn't it? That's the attraction of the digital world. Like, if I don't like you, I don't have to deal with it. Yeah, I don't have to deal with that.
But that's suppressing us.
But what I can do is I can go and find 300 other people that love Pokemon. You know what I mean? Whatever it is that your unique interest is, you can go online, you can find that world to belong to, and that's where people find their belonging sometimes online, which again isn't always the best thing. Sometimes better than not having any connection or any belonging, but actually there's
the balance has to be there, doesn't it?
It's what comes later.
There's something I want to ask you, Rich, because I'm guessing you're probably genned into this, but it's something I've been learning about recently, and it sort of ties in with what we're talking about and your experience as well. But there's been what I'm aware of, a lot of research lately about gaming, young people getting into gaming from a very young age, and that correlation with gambling addiction in later life, in the late teens and whatnot, and 20s. And for me, you know, having read some of those articles and those papers, it totally makes sense. It really does. That sort of dopamine and, you know, that rush that it gives you. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that they're just with what these papers have been looking into, or do you think?
Yeah. So this is a rabbit hole, by the way.
Buckle up, kids.
Yeah, but let's try and summarise it in a quite brief way, but there's massive links, that, your FIFA packs, for example, you buy in packs and open them that you don't know what you're opening. So it's risk and reward, isn't it? I risk me money and I get a reward. That's gambling. That is ultimately what gambling is, risk and reward. And that's now in lots of games, so FIFA's just one of them. Even Roblox, if you've got young kids, you've probably seen them play on Roblox. There's gambling features in Roblox now, and that's scary because that's aimed at 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, and it's basically grooming kids into having this risk and reward mentality.
I've been going through these exact things you're mentioning, yeah.
100% links to gambling, and it increases the risk. And then you add even more worrying is the rise in neurodiversity, and how them kids are spending even more time online. And the gambling companies make a lot of money, and some of the UK regulated sites can't do certain stuff online because they're regulated by the Gambling Commission. But we're in a digital world now. You can be anywhere in the world. So there's a big, massive cryptocurrency casino online who appear on the front of Everton's shirt. I'm not going to say who they are because I didn't want to publicise them, but you'll all know who they are if you follow football or anything. They're registered in a tiny little island offshore, and there's very little regulation about what they can or can't do. And what they've decided to do is to pick up these streamers, these YouTubers and streamers and gamers. Some of them are neurodiverse themselves who have thousands, millions of followers online, and they've started paying them to stream themselves gambling on their sites. So Drake, the rapper, he was paid over £20 million last year just to sit and stream online to kids. So it's a massive, massive problem that we're going to be hit with in the future. Is these kids are now, and I was talking about aspiration culture, they're building a relationship with these streamers. XQC. I don't know if you've ever heard XQC, but he was one of the biggest streamers on Twitch ever. He now sits and streams himself gambling online. 24/7.
And the whole thing's just being funded just to draw his audience in.
To draw the audience in, yeah. And then obviously you get your free sign-ups and you get your free spins and you get your free games, and that lures them in. And then they potentially have got £1,000 worth of free spins, and they spin the £1,000, and then they think they've lost £1,000, so they start chasing the £1,000. But they never had the £1,000 in the first place. Yeah. But that's the way that these
disgusting,
places,
man.
It is, and
disgusting.
The UK is regulated to a degree. There's still so much more that could be done. I could be on my high horse all day about the gambling companies, but actually for me,
more power to you, man.
It doesn't serve me as much as it probably should, because I feel like I've only got so much time and energy to give, and I don't feel that's good use of my time and energy. So for me, I'm about raising awareness so people have an understanding of it, but I'm not going to sit here and say X, Y, or Z, because when you look at how big these companies are,
does it not come down to, Richie, like, all we can do, which, as you alluded to, roadblocks and the FIFA packs, I'm going through that with my kids now. My boys are 9 and 11 coming up. And all I come back to is education. So we've always, like I said before, even my wife and I, we dumped out of all the socials because we were like, I don't want my kids getting lost in here, because starting an Instagram account leads to fucking being addicted to gambling by the time they're 16 and don't come out of the bedroom. All you can do is educate your kids and say, look, this is why we don't do that as much as that, because you need to be here in the real world. And we've broken it down to, like, look, we need to be physical, not digital, is more. That's it. The Facebook infinite scroll is modelled on the bandit spin.
Yeah, 100%.
Problem with that is, Sam, right? And we actually just discussed it this week about, if you say you're saying to your kids, look, there's a correlation between this game you're playing that they absolutely love and they don't see any harm in it, and trying to say that to a young kid and saying, becoming a gambling addict, they're going to look at you and go, fuck's sake, Dad, shut up. What are you talking about? Even though it's completely true, they're not going to see that, are they? Yeah. They're going to think, that's Dad nagging.
Yeah, but I don't say it like that. I'll use examples of like, their reality, like, obviously you can't make that jump to, like, you're going to end up, because that's just. But
they're the realities that we're going to have to try and sort of reinforce, aren't we? And the other thing is, and this is what we were just talking about, is when you take something away from someone,
you suppress it.
How much more do they want it? Yeah. And like, you know, where you try to step in, you say, right, we're going to limit your screen time, this, that, and the other, and then they go to their mates, and their mates have just got infinite screen time, and they just spend 4 hours.
But this is where I educate.
School
But this is what I educate my kids on. So I'll use those kids as an example, and we'll look deeper at their behaviour, how they are socially.
Using their mates as like a case study.
yeah.
Let's take Jacob for example. You know.
Yeah, well, my lad's come home from an house and he's like, oh, you know, is this and that, and then he's fucking kicking off, and this happened, and he's fucking shouting at his mum, and it's like, well, there you go. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you were staring, like, and I've seen you, Sonny, when I let you play FIFA for 6 hours on a Saturday, and you come off and you're groggy, like, that's it. It's cool.
Hungry.
Don't mind. So I'm always I'm never holding them back from anything, because as we rightly say, you know, you suppress it, they won't go in towards it.
Yeah, and I think the most important part of this is meeting them where they're at.
Yeah, you said that earlier, Richie.
And
yeah, great.
It's so important, and I don't think that's just with kids. I think that's with
everybody.
People. Yeah. That's life, you know. If you try and tell anybody that they should do X, Y, or Z, you've massively missed the point, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've got to go meet that person where they're currently at, get an understanding of who they are and what makes them tick, and then there's a process to help somebody educate somebody on other ways, you know. And it's not just about having one way, you know. In our organisation, which is Epic Restart Foundation, we support people in recovery from gambling harm, but we're not the only way, you know. And what we advocate for is multiple pathways to recovery, and there's multiple pathways to everything in life, you know. So there's not just one size fits all, and it's about how do I have the ability to communicate with somebody and be able to educate them and be able to, you know, steer them on the right path. Ultimately, we can't do everything for everyone, you know. We can't be the lifeguard who's pulling people out of the water all the time, you know. And I think what we've got to try and do is be an example, you know, set the example, you know. And I think that's much more valuable.
If you want to see the change, you be the change, don't you?
That kind of sums up, I guess, my mixed up bro fucking science approach is like, we try to be doing more than saying. Yeah. So we'll be active, we'll be out and about, we'll be playing football, we're going camping, do you know what I mean? We're doing rather than we're all in the house and you're on that. No, come off there, because we're just busy doing stuff. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And then when we're chilling, no problem.
And that's a good message, though, isn't it? Because, like, as parents, you're trying to figure it out, aren't you? And you know, and you think you're doing the right thing sometimes, and then you look back and you're like, actually, no, that wasn't. I was a bit heavy-handed there, and it hasn't had the desired effect. But
even that in itself, Ray, having the awareness to go, maybe I didn't handle that right, you know, and go to your son or your daughter and say, do you know what it is? I'm sorry for the way I went on before. I realised I didn't really handle that in a very good way. Like, that's showing an example that's okay to be wrong. That's showing an example.
Does that reaffirm what you said at the beginning about those little moments where you're, in a minute, son, by being conscious and going back to it? Oh, do you know what? I got that wrong earlier. They've probably left it, but it's subliminally downloaded. But you've gone back and said, oh, you know, last night, I've done this so often. Every week I do this. Sonny, I was a bit edgy earlier. Dad's been busy at work. I'm knackered. I shouldn't have, whatever. I just want you to know that, boy. I'm proud of you. And Dad's just a bit, you know, and that, I think, is the opposite of those little mundane moments where you...
100%.
You know, the reason he does that is because Sonny's, how old now?
He's nearly 11.
Yeah, he's going to be 6'6". So that's why he's getting the apologies in now. One day, Sonny's going to give him a backhand. What's happening there?
I'm sorry, isn't it? Yeah. And, you know, be the example you want to see in others.
Yeah.
But the example for me is to the kids.
Like, by improving yourself is how you're actually bringing your kids up, hopefully, in a way that, you know,
and like there was a moment in my recovery where my son wanted to show the kids in his class clips of us playing football on YouTube. So bearing in mind, when I got into recovery, I went and I'd done a counselling degree, come out of that, and told my story in lots of places. So it was on the news and BBC, 90V and all that sort of stuff, and in the papers. So my son goes on, 9-year-old he was at the time, and searches my name, Richie Paxton. Now, if you go online and you search Richie Paxton, the first thing that comes up is ex-professional footballer has a problem with drinking drugs. You know, so my son comes out of school and says, "Dad, I searched for you to show the kids football," and my son sees his dad's an alcoholic and a drug addict, basically, and he says to his dad, "You take drugs." And that was a hard conversation.
I was going to say, were you honest with him? Were you able to?
Yeah, I was brutally honest with him, you know, and I always said I would never hide it from them.
Great.
And I said, I used to, son, that was the way Dad used to try and cope with life, and I really struggled. So I turned to some things that weren't very healthy for us. And And my son turned around and says, "Is that why you're a counsellor now, so you can help other people?"
Oh.
And you know, and straight away he knew, and he got it.
I love that.
And it was one of them
What a
most
valuable
beautiful
lesson.
moments, you know.
The truth.
The truth.
The truth.
And I told him the truth, and he got it, you know. And he went into school the next day, and he says, "Can I be one of the school counsellors?" Because he wanted to help the people in the playground
that's amazing,
who
Richie.
didn't have friends, and that's been the example. Don't know when I say that, it's like, it's a powerful thing.
I love that.
If you can do that, but it's about having the courage, isn't it? You've got to have the courage to be honest and vulnerable.
Because you've had to be honest with yourself in order to be able to have
100%.
that happen. You know, like you said, you mentioned earlier, the mask or you know, presenting. And when those difficult questions and conversations come along with kids, you know, we all have a tendency to think, oh, they don't understand. Or, you know, Bambi lives, you know, like, oh, don't worry about it. But no, actually, if you have sort of accepted and faced yourself, that's probably one of the most powerful things you can ever give your kids, because that is a prime example of like the truth not being pretty, but actually the result, the ongoing.
Yeah, and I think kids are, like I said earlier, they're very creative. They make up their own stories, you know. So the story prior to this about me and their mum splitting up was because I was bathing the kids one day and we were squirting the mum with a water pistol, and mum didn't like being squirted with a water pistol, and that's why dad got kicked out. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't know that story until a few years later, but that was the story my son had created around why dad didn't live at home. But then when this all came out, and it was like, and this is why, you know, me and your mum don't live together anymore, he could then make more sense of it. And it wasn't about him squirting his mum in the bath anymore, which potentially it was me and him squirting, but actually him thinking that he played a part in me leaving or me being kicked out was huge, you know, because how's he internalising that? How's he living with that? How's he understanding that? And although he's never come and said, "You left because of me," it doesn't take a genius to work out that he's been thinking about it, because he's created a story.
Well, that would have been
about
his thing to internalise over his 18-year battle, wouldn't it?
And then where does that manifest to? So
the truth, man.
The truth is very powerful. I think,
so
but
powerful.
It's saying that it's not easy.
No, God, no.
It's really hard.
But that's why it's powerful, isn't it?
That touches a big nerve on me, actually, because for many years, so I've got two older sisters, and they're 12 and 14 years older than me, and their experience of growing up was completely different to mine. So from as young as I can remember, my mum, what I understand now, was struggling with bipolar disorder, undiagnosed. And she was self-medicating with alcohol. So all I ever knew was when I was around, that was the dynamic, you know, and it affected every single relationship, and, you know, from your parents to the family dynamic, and it really affected me mum in a big way, and it, as a result, affected me. And I didn't realise that I was carrying with me for a long time that I thought I was the issue, because I was like, my dad would often say it was like, "Oh, you are the greatest mistake that ever happened to us," right? And I'm like, well, that's playing a story in my head that I wasn't meant to be here. I was a mistake. And then I'm thinking, gosh, is that why mum started drinking? You know, because I wasn't meant to be here. And then I come around and I was quite a
rambunctious.
Yeah, I was a challenging child. And she often said to us, you know, one day this will come back round. Now I've got two quite boisterous boys, so I'm getting me comeuppance.
Your dose.
I lived with that for a long, long time until I had to have a sit down, basically, with both my sisters and my dad and say, look, was it my fault? Like, because I'd lived with that for so long, blaming myself that I was the problem. And they were just like, absolutely not. You know, these things would have probably always presented themselves. It just happened in that space and time, you know. And then you've really got to try and unpick it in your brain, because that narrative has been in my head since I was a little kid, you know. And like you say, that
dose of the truth,
well, that relationship you have with yourself, and that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and we all create stories all the time, don't we? That's ultimately what we do throughout life. We create stories, and we make. You know, our perception of the truth isn't always the truth. Our perception of fact isn't always fact, you know, and people have core beliefs that they've been brought up with, and, you know, going adulthood, and your core beliefs are shaped in slightly different ways. And I think we can always challenge our core beliefs, you know, like what you've done there. You've challenged that core belief that you were the problem. And I think that you can do this at any time in life. It doesn't have to be at a specific point. And, you know, I'd encourage anybody to sit down and work out who they are, you know, if they want to work out who they are. Who are they? What are the value? Do you know, does that match up to the life they're living? If it doesn't match up to the life they're living, then what needs to change so they can match up? Because when you don't live your life by your values, there's friction. And when there's friction, you know, that's when the problems come, because you're not living by the way that you want to live your life, and that causes a lot of shit.
That's a really interesting point that you make on core beliefs, because it was something that I didn't really understand until I spoke to a psychologist quite recently, and he sort of educated me on core beliefs and how a lot of them are formed between the ages of 6 and 16. And your core beliefs, you can't really just say, these are my core beliefs. You tend to feel them.
They just steer you, don't they?
Yeah, and that's where this whole thing about my mum and me thinking that it was my fault came from, right? We were sitting having a session once, and he just said to us out the blue, do you ever feel like you're a burden? And it felt like somebody punched us in the gut, right? And I just, like, it took me breath away, and I was like, what? And he just started saying, like, you know, this and each, and I was like, oh my God, that is the feeling I've been living with. Like, I was a burden. It was my fault. Me coming along was the cause of all this, you know. And that's when I started to really unpick it. And it was because I felt it. That was my core belief deep within my being, that I was a burden. And I've carried it through every relationship I've ever been in, you know, like, I'm a burden, I'm not worthy, you know. And it drove a lot of my insecurities. And it's still something I'm working on now. It's not like I've clicked my fingers, because it's been so ingrained in my brain and my being. But it's a really interesting thing, that thing on core beliefs. And I would urge anybody listening to really dial into that and do a bit of work on it, because you'd be absolutely amazed what is lurking deep in your psyche,
100%.
and is driving your decisions.
When awareness was brought to me about it, I was like, you can't change them things. You know, and that was my belief. You can't change them things. I'm ingrained with them. And somebody said it was, do you know when you were a kid? Have you got kids? Yeah. How old are your kids? Do they believe in Santa Claus? I was like, yeah. Well, that was a core belief you had until you were at a certain age and you knew different or you knew better.
20.
And I was like, fuck.
That's it, isn't it?
It's that simple, you know. Yeah. That core belief that you ingrain in your child until a certain age, until they go, hold on a minute, I've got an awareness now that this might not be real. And then they change their core belief around that, you know, and it's no different to any other core belief. You can change and challenge that core belief at any given time. And, you know, like I said before, my story from a young age, I didn't think I was worthy. I didn't think I was good enough. I couldn't spell. That's what it was all coming back to, you know. At school, I felt like I didn't fit in. I had lots of people around us, but I didn't fit in. I didn't belong anywhere. And through addiction, you know, massive struggle with addiction, alcohol, gambling initially, but then drugs and alcohol as well. I used that to escape, because I didn't feel like I fitted in. I didn't feel like I was worthy. I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. All of them things were core beliefs that I would tell myself over and over again. And it wasn't until a 34-year-old I went into rehab that I was able to challenge them core beliefs, you know. And everybody says, well, do you regret, you know, the things you've done, and do you regret the addiction and all that sort of stuff? But actually, had I not had them things at that time, that's all I knew. So that was my survival mechanism. That's what helped me get through every single day. And without them things, would I have made it to today now? Probably not. That's ultimately what, you know, I've come to the conclusion of, is I had to go through all that shit so I could get to this point in life. And I'm grateful for that. And that's funny to say. I'm grateful for the struggle, because it's actually created a better life now. And had I not been through the struggle, or had I not stood on the bridge, or had I not been in rehab, I might never have faced them underlying core beliefs, which actually were bullshit in my head that I'd created about my life and my childhood and everything else. And the biggest thing for me now is I get to create new stories.
I was going to say,
I can create any story I want in my head, and if I tell myself it enough times, I'll probably believe it. I've got to be careful, because I can get carried away with myself as well.
But that's a power of manifestation, isn't it? You know,
but you can create the life that you want to create in any way, shape, or form that you believe possible.
And that's an interesting thing about addiction, isn't it? Because, like you're saying, a lot of people think with addiction, that alcohol's a problem, as if like everybody who's an alcoholic just loves alcohol, loves the taste of it, the truth is you're soothing yourself, aren't you? There's always
escape.
Yeah. So it's not the problem, it's like the short-term answer that you're struggling with something, this is soothing you in essence. And like you say, with a lot of addiction, it's stripping it right back to those core beliefs and those struggles that people are having fundamentally that go way back. And then they're just using these things as like a coping strategy to get through and deal with these things. And that's something that really I find interesting about.
I think it massively helps people I've worked with. It's massively helped them build a better relationship with themselves as well. And I think ultimately that's what it comes down to in terms of like, if you want a better quality of life, you've got to build a better relationship with yourself. And currently, if you've never had a good relationship with yourself, or you think you're the burden, or you've got no self-worth, or whatever the story is that you've created about your past, if you don't challenge that at any given time, that's going to always come back and bite you on the arse at some point. Yeah. And I think it's really important that you challenge that belief and challenge that behaviour and really understand why and make peace with it a little bit. And I'm not saying that everything's rosy in life and it's like, oh, well, actually, I've made peace with that now and I can just go and live this perfect life. You can it. There's still shit that you've got to deal with, and there's still consequences to some of your actions and all of that sort of stuff. But how do you actually move on?
Accept. I think what you just said there, Richie, about coming to terms with it and not changing what you've been through, because it has brought you to where you are. And we're going to get more into in a moment, like not just you having a better relationship with yourself, but what you're now being able to provide to lots and lots and lots of people with the work that you've done. I think it's a really important point you make about looking back at your past and not, making peace with it. Yeah, you might still be upset about certain behaviour. I know I am. I sometimes wake up in the night and of things I've done and people that come to me that I've treated badly. But I do know that I'm so far from that now, and I'm chipping away every day. Is such an important thing to do, and to get to a place where, as I think all three of us in this room are now doing something where hopefully just having this conversation, there might be somebody listening to this now that might trigger that little bit of introspection or whatever it is. That's huge, and I think that's the payoff, isn't it? That's the payoff in the end, is you're putting something positive back, no matter what the journey's been. If you face it, turn and face it and accept it.
And it goes back to a point you made almost at the start of this pod about, the way you talk to yourself and the relationship you have with yourself. And that's something that I've really had to work on is, I could give people fantastic advice, but I'm my own worst critic. And I think a lot of people listening to this will probably
concur,
relate to that. But, when people say be kind to yourself, it's one of the biggest things that I've had to work on, and one of the hardest things is actually just stop being so harsh on myself, and I think to myself, would I say that to anyone else? The way I'm talking to myself and beating myself up, would I ever say that to anyone? Not even a friend, just a stranger. I wouldn't say that to anyone, but I'll say it to myself. It's so bizarre, like beating yourself up, and I used to get stuck in this cycle, it just constantly berating myself for things.
And I think that there's some important parts in that, isn't there? Of be kind to yourself. Yeah, okay. How the fuck do I do that then?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, because if you've never been doing that, or you haven't done that for a long time, and you see yourself as a worthless piece of shit, or whatever it is that you see yourself as, how do you change that belief? And
it's not just words, or it's actions.
No,
isn't
I talk to people all the time. You've got to do the work. Do the work, and they're like, well, what's the work? And it's having this self-awareness and understanding that, to catch yourself when you are talking to yourself like a piece of shit, when you are being horrible, or that internal voice that's in there is telling you to do things that you shouldn't be wanting to do. But how do you create the space, or enough space, to be able to do something different, for your action to be something other than the first thought or behaviour? And there's a saying by Viktor Frankl, and I use it all the time, and every time I see it I get a little bit wrong, so forgive us if I get this slightly different, but it's between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose, and in that choice is our growth and our freedom. And that's so important for me. How do we create space between that initial thought we have, and how do we challenge that initial thought to be able to then act in a different way? And sometimes, you know, in my early recovery, every time that I had the awareness I was talking to myself like a piece of shit, I'd get a notepad and pen out and I'd write 3 things down that I loved about myself, 3 things down that I was doing really well, 3 things down that, you know, were positives in my life. And that took a lot of work. You know, I've got 6 work,
25 notepads.
6 years worth of journals that I've got where I've been doing this work, because it's never ending. I still have the thoughts now. I still think sometimes I'm not good enough, but I've got to go and look for evidence. You've got to go and look for the evidence that you are good enough, you know. So at the end of every day, I write, end of every day. That's a loose term here, by the way. Every day that I remember to do it, I write down 3 things that I've done really well that day. And that's over 1,000 things every day. So in my recovery, I've got over 5,000 things I've done well in books in the house. And at any point, I can pick them up and look at them. And that's the evidence that I'm doing all right. I'm a better version than me than I was 6.5 years ago when I got in recovery. Am I a finished article? No. Are we ever a finished article? No. But I'm work in progress. And I think that's the important thing is, you can start this at any time, and it's never perfect, and it's never always pretty, and it probably isn't going to always go the way you want it to go. But if you keep doing the right things and you keep building evidence that you're a better version of yourself, then you can change that story, you can change that narrative, you can change the way you talk to yourself. And it deep down in the core, you'll start believing a different version of life, or what it might look like for you. You know, and there's a few corny lines, you know, you can be the author of your next chapter and all that sort of stuff. But actually, there's some real truth in it as well. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
I can throw loads of these corny lines out, and actually, when you strip them all back, there's actually some meaning in a lot of them. And I truly do believe that. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here.
Well, do you know what's going through my mind as I'm listening to you talk there, Richie, is like, I'm thinking about people I know and love. I'm thinking about my own story. So marijuana, right? Habitual behaviours. I grew up in a culture where marijuana was just a fucking staple. You know, you wake up, you smoke, you fucking have dinner, you smoke, you just smoke. And what that does cognitively to you, because what we're talking about here is like a penny drop moment, or, you know, might be someone listening to this podcast who's been teetering on the edge and battling themselves, and this might be enough to make them reach for Viktor Frankl's book, or reach for something, or dig deep. But when there's habitual substances that kind of control, like when you're in a marijuana state, when you're stoned 90% of your waking hours, like the ability to kick your brain into a gear, or to clear the fog, to create, you know, I'm thinking of people I love that I know. I've seen them when they have like had a 6 week, they've been battling all the time. I'm going to kick the weed. I've done 6 weeks with no weed, and you can see the whites in their eyes, and they're like becoming present, and you start thinking in a clearer way. There's so many, like I say, people I know that I care about that probably are having these thoughts and trying to get to that moment where you can have some clarity and maybe start to change some behaviours, but that fog is thick and it's heavy, and you get home from a day's work on a building site and you're knackered and it's winter and you're just so used to putting them skins together or grabbing that bong, and that feeling that, and it's hard of how it's such a difficult thing. And weed is like one of them substances where we kind of think, oh, it's all right, weed, because it's not heroin and it's not. It's not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And everything you said there, like gambling, you know, gambling is a behavioural addiction.
Yeah.
It's so common in society. It's so acceptable in society. Weed's so acceptable now. You know, like there's other struggles other than just that internal battle, I think, as well. And society's got a lot to play into it, hasn't it? So it's not easy. I think first and foremost, you've got to understand why. Why do I want to change? Because if you can't understand your why, or you can't understand the reason behind why you want to change, then you probably battle and always go back to it at some point, because us as human beings, we're wired for familiarity. You know, I'd rather be in the uncomfortable familiarity of being stoned than the uncertainty of what my life might be like if I don't smoke.
Yeah.
Richie, I've got a question for you, and this sort of harks back to a friend of mine who has been sober for a little while, and they were talking about getting clean, and they were saying that for many years, and you're talking about your why. They try to do it for other people, so you know, I'm causing my mum so much trouble. I'm going to stop doing this, and you know, my partner or whatever. But they said that only until they started doing it for themselves was the turning point. How do you feel about that? I just wanted to pick your brains.
Given your experience. I agree massively. I think how people get into recovery or how people start to address, you know, unhealthy behaviours or relationships they have, that's up to them. You know, they might be dragged there, the kids might force them there, you know, somebody might get them there. But until you actually have the acceptance that I need to do this for myself, then you're probably always going to end up back down them routes, because actually everything we do in life serves us. That's what people need to realise, you know. So if you get stoned, it serves you. If you gamble, it serves you. If you drink alcohol, it serves you.
If you go for a run,
get something from it.
Yeah.
You know, you go to the gym, it serves. Well, everything we decide to do in life, we do because there's a meaning behind it.
Whether it's soothing you or giving you a peace of mind.
It might be helping you escape. It might be helping you feel good. It might be helping you just avoid the feeling and emotion that you're unsure of how to deal with. Everything serves us. But getting back to your point, I think it's so important that it comes from within. It comes from, like,
it's that truth
from
again.
me.
It's that truth again,
and actually standing and looking yourself in the mirror and saying, fuck, I need some help here. I need to change something here. Like, that's a big moment for a lot of people. And
I've had
the
that
sad thing about this, though, Ray, for me, is it normally takes somebody to hit absolute rock bottom, or, you know, a health condition. So I used to work with people with long-term health conditions. Nobody would ever come and exercise until they'd had a heart attack. Nobody would ever come and exercise until they'd been diagnosed with cancer. Nobody would ever come and exercise till they had COPD. No one would stop smoking until they actually got diagnosed with COPD. All of these things happen because somebody's
touched it,
had a big, massive realisation, and you've been to the depths most of the time. But actually, anybody can change at any time, you know. So why wait to that point? You know, like, I'm encouraging everybody to just have a little look at their relationship with whatever's going on in their life, whether it's with themselves, with other people, with substances, with behaviours. And when we're talking about behaviours, it's important. It's not just about gambling. It could be about sex. It could be about shopping. It could be, about the gym. It could be your relationship with going in the sea. It's something I do, but I see people that still have an unhealthy relationship with it because it causes a negative impact or consequences other areas of their life. You know, so just because it's seen as healthy doesn't mean it is, because anything that's healthy can always become unhealthy as well. And it's about finding them balances. That said, I'd much rather have an unhealthy relationship with going for a run than trying cocaine up my nose.
I think I've been in both sides of that.
I think we've also got to recognise that you're probably never going to stop an unhealthy behaviour without replacing it with a different behaviour.
Is that something you really find?
Honestly, massively. And I think that's where you've got to find things to do with your time. You've got to find things to put your attention into. And I always go back to, if you find your passion and purpose, you'll get fulfillment. And if you've got passion and purpose and fulfillment in your life, you know, you're heading in the right direction. You're going a great way. That's not to mean that you can't do something about it if you don't know what your passion is or what your purpose in life is, because they're big questions to find out. But start the journey of trying to find out what makes you tick and who you are. And like I said before, go back to your values. What is it that I value in life? What is the type of person that I want to be?
That's a great starting point for all of us, isn't it?
On the subject of big questions, I've got a big question for you, Richie.
Come on.
And it's a question that we ask everybody that comes on this podcast. And I know you're very passionate about the Northeast. The people here, fantastic people, fantastic place to live. But the truth is, whether it be gambling, drinking, drugs, addiction, mental health, suicide, this region is struggling massively. We've got some of the worst statistics relating to poor mental health and suicide in the whole of the UK. And that was one of the drivers for us doing this podcast, to get people on and really try to drill in as to the why. You know, and Sam often alludes to the fact that if you talk to people about the northeast of England and you ask them, you know, characteristics of Geordies or, you know, people in the northeast, they'll say, oh, happiest, nicest, friendliest people you could meet. So why is it that we are struggling so badly in this region? Have you got any insight, or do you think you could shed any light on what you possibly think is the cause?
There could be a million reasons, couldn't there? I think for me, the Northeast, you know, the culture of the Northeast is a culture of masculinity, you know, bravado, you know, we are the kindest, happiest, nicest people in the north in England, according to everybody else in England. But we're probably really good at masking what's really going on, I think, you know, and because that's the core belief that is ingrained in the UK, that the North East's a great place to be, that's how we present ourselves. We live up to it. That's the story that's been told about us. So I do need to put this front on. I do need to
I'll be the loud one.
Mask this thing. You know, and not everybody in the North East is boisterous or happy or in it. But actually, when it really comes down to it, what's the story that's been told about the North East? Is that we're out there and we're happy and, you know, life's great. If you actually come in the North East, you can dig into all of the communities and the, you know, the mining villages, and, you know, you'll see how unhealthy some of these places are. And like you say, the prevalence of alcohol, drugs, mental health, all that sort of stuff is huge. And I think we probably play up to the story a little bit.
Well, that core belief, that's the first time I've heard it put that way, Richie. You know, like the idea that, you know, tough industry, masculine, hard-working, drink to recover, kind of that being a core belief, because we've alluded to that a lot. That's quite consistent.
Becomes who you are, isn't it? And
but then
you've
that
got to be
core
that
belief, generationally, that, you know, like you say, we're the laugh. Geordie's the crack at the party and fucking here to drink fucking 20 pints and have a laugh and lovely and
I think generationally as well. I think it's through my upbringing and stuff like that. I alluded to me dad, you know, emotions wise, you know, it wasn't. He didn't tell us he loved us every night. He struggled. He didn't hug us every night. That wasn't his way of showing love. But if you then look at my dad's dad, he was at war. Do you know what I mean? He's in World War II.
Yeah.
Like, he was surrounded by men. He wouldn't have come back being able to show his love and attention to my dad. And, you know, and then my dad worked on the buildings, and, you know, he was a tradesman and surrounded by blokes all the time. Like, it's not something that's normalised in society, is for people to show that love and affection and all that sort of stuff. And then we're moving into a place now where are we coming too soft? Do you know what I mean? As well,
this is interesting.
Have we gone straight from being this masculinity and, you know, bravado and surrounding ourselves with blokes who cannot share their emotions and feelings, to now going, you need to talk.
Well, there's
you need to talk, and I'm a massive advocate of people talking. Mm-hmm. But what I think is the missing link here, and not a lot of people mention this, is if you're talking, nobody has the ability to listen. You're back to square one.
Yeah,
because then you'll shut up even more. Yeah. Because you go, well, I haven't been heard. He's not interested. They're not that bothered. So what's the fucking point in talking anyway? So it's really important that we not just help people understand the skill of talking. We help people understand the skill of how to listen and how to listen in a correct way so somebody feels heard. And when people start feeling heard, they might start sharing a little bit more and become a bit more vulnerable. And then we can start getting to the underlying issues and working out what it is that's really making people tick and why they actually go to the depths.
That's interesting.
That's a big message.
Active listening. And you can look that up, folks. It's a straightforward thing to look up and have a look at. And it's interesting when you actually learn about active listening, like listening with, I guess, what we talked about earlier with our kids, being present. Yeah. When you really listen, and it's body
language as well, isn't it? It's maintaining that eye contact. Mm-hmm. It's being open. You know, the body language you use, and you're receiving what they're saying, and you're really taking it in.
You want to hear it.
Yeah, you want.
I think the other thing that's really important in this, you know, like we have a bit of a framework at Every Restart Foundation that we use around active listening. It's something that anybody in addiction, we massively encourage. Anybody in recovery that's come out of addiction, that they learn to listen, because they all want to talk, but not many of them know how to listen. And if you want to build new relationships or you want to repair old relationships, you've got to listen to the other person that's involved in that relationship as well. And having the ability just to allow them to feel heard can go such a long way in repairing relationships and helping people move forward without, you know, causing absolute carnage in the relationship.
Do you know what? I think you've fucking nailed it for me, Richie, on my own internal evolution of this. You know what I mean? Like, because you're right, the culture is telling everybody talk, and obviously everyone can talk, whether that's digitally now, here's my post, here's my thing, but to listen, to actually listen, that's you've nailed that on. Yeah, that's. And
the other important thing I think here is understanding. So when I say people need to actively listen, they do, but actually I can sit here and talk to you too, say exactly the same things to both of you, and you both internalize it completely different. So actually listening, but then actually seeking clarification on what you've heard is so important as well. So, you know, even just saying, you know, I heard you talk about your son before and X, Y, and Z. Have I got this right? You know, and what'll end up happening is you'll go, yeah, you did, and you heard us, and all of this other stuff as well. Like, and you'll just...
Isn't that the same as before? That's exactly the same as at the top of the conversation when he's, Dad, look at this, Dad, look at that.
Yeah.
And my daughter did it last night. I had it last night, right? I'm watching... I don't know what I was watching. What was I watching? Anyway, Netflix, right? And Indigo comes up and she's been at the coffee table and she's drawing a... Well, we're watching Alien Investigation on Netflix. Check it out, George and that. Anyway, she comes up and she's drawing these aliens, right? And Daddy, look. And I'm like, yeah. And I did that thing. It's like, oh yeah. And I kind of briefly looked at it. I still didn't ignore her. I was like, oh yeah, lovely. And then I turned back to the thing.
Yourself.
And then I turned back straight away and I was like, oh, whoa. And then I was like, oh, look, and you've used pink. I love how you've used pink because you've used pink. You know, and the difference in her, when she understood by, I think similarly to what you're saying, like, oh, and you mean, you know, like, it's huge.
Yeah, totally. And it's so powerful. And do you know the other thing that happens when that, and if you go, oh yeah, you've used pink, and she goes, that's not pink, Dad, that's orange. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it might be something as simple as that.
Yeah. And then she puts you right.
And she puts you right, and then you're actually in the picture, aren't you?
Yes.
You're not just sitting in your own head with your own perception of what's being said. You're actually in the picture.
Yeah.
And now you're both on the same page, you know, and there's loads of stuff like this that I talk about, but in relationships, you know, we get in relationships or we have relationships, and one of the things that I used to do would be like, well, what would I like for a present? I'll go and buy that person the present, you know, and for me, it's like time. I like spend time in places and experiences. So I'll buy them a weekend in the Lake District, or we'll go to this place, and I'm benefit from it as well. And they get it, and they're like, thanks, great. Yeah. And you're like, you fucking ungrateful bastard. You know what I mean? And like, but then what we probably haven't done at this point is go, well, actually, what are their values? What's their values? Because I've worked out what my values are. My values are about spending time in nature and being in the Lake District and climbing mountains, and I value that. So if you want a good present from me, you're going to get something that I value. But actually, I've never actually had a conversation around what you value. And this person values a Prada bag. Do you know what I mean?
This is like listening, isn't it? Instead of talking. It's
completely.
Kind of that analogy, isn't it? You're listening and not talking in that. In a sense, aren't you? Like, you put yourself out of the way. It's not about my story. It's your story.
Yeah.
That's
and then we work out where these values line
You've
up.
blown my noggin with the listening. I'll take this away into my life. You've hit something for me there, Richie. I love that. Listening, fucking
that's the power. That's the power of this, isn't it? We're all learning.
We're all learning all the time, aren't we?
On the subject of learning. So the next question, and this is a question we ask on every pod, is: if you had any advice for anyone that's listening that might be struggling with addiction, or they might be struggling with their mental health, or just stuck in a little bit of a moment, what would you say was the one thing that's changed everything for you? The one key thing that really improved your mental health and well-being?
Big question.
I'm full of them today, Richie.
for me, like, even in early recovery, I still struggled, you know, so I was abstinent, but my life wasn't getting better, you know, and it wasn't until I worked out what I valued in life that I really started living by them values, and that was a massive piece of work for me. And a book that massively helped us is a book by Dr. John D. Martini called The Values Factor. And that helped us work out what my true values are, because we can all have values of like honesty and integrity, and then you fuck it.
Well, you say them because you want other people to think that of you as well.
That's what you think society.
Yes.
That's the core belief.
I'm a team player, but I can work individually.
But I hate fucking being around people. You know what I mean? Like, so work out what your true values are first and foremost. I think that was a massive thing for me, and then finding community, finding other people that are on the same wavelength, that can call you out on your bullshit. And that was one of the big game changers for me, was actually, I could sit in a room with a therapist and tell the therapist exactly what they want to hear.
A lot of
and
people
walk out and go, that was a great session. and I'll go home and cry my fucking eyes out because I got absolutely nothing from it.
Being
but actually
there.
finding people in my lives now, you know, and you know some of them, you know, some of the guys that are in my lives now, they call me out on my bullshit. You know, if they see us isolating, they'll pick up the phone and say, what's the matter with you? You know, like, it's not just this one way thing. You know, it's a group of people that have got each other's best interests at heart. And how you find that is difficult sometimes. It's not, it's dead easy, but we make it difficult. It's dead easy by just going putting yourself in situations to speak to people and be around people. Now I have massive social anxiety, so doing that for me was fucking difficult. But actually, you've just got to have a bit of courage, haven't you? You've got to have a bit of courage to stand in something that's a little bit uncomfortable first and foremost. And
Well, let's be honest, anybody listening to this is actually taking that initial step, aren't they? Because they're listening for a reason.
they're showing they want to change or
So-
they want to do
So
something
that in
slightly
itself
different.
is a part of that, isn't it? And that step. And
Can I also say, though, listening does fuck all for you. Listening does absolute jack shit for you. What you've got to do is listen
And hear.
and then go and put something into action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the action part is the only way that we ever going to change is if you action something. And again, in my early recovery, I was the biggest geek on the planet. I would listen to the podcasts, I'd read the books, self-help books I've got in the house. Fuck me, unbelievable. You know, I've read them all, some of them twice. I've got Audible, you know, I've got 100 books on Audible, self-help. I've got podcast after podcast after podcast. I've done courses with some of the biggest coaches and, you know, motivational speakers in the world. I've been back to uni and done a degree. Do you know what? It all means absolute jack shit unless you put something into practice.
Treat yourself and treat other people better. You know, I just had an epiphany there. Here I am, all ears. I'm listening. But you know what? I just thought when you just mentioned podcasts there, right? And you'll know a bit about I went on a podcast. We spoke briefly before the pod, didn't we, about my journey here today. And I put the radio on because my phone's knackered where I normally listen to podcasts. Coming back to me having the epiphany there about listening, it's actually what I have been doing in terms of podcasts. So a huge part of my journey was logging onto the podcast, listening to people talking truthfully, uncensored, without adverts and selling something and all that. And I actually did take a lot of things on. And I think by now everybody knows the Rogan podcast is enormous, right? It's such a big thing now. It's a juggernaut. But when I came across that in like 2011, he's in his kitchen, you know, with a webcam in his fucking back room. And some of the conversations, Bruce Lipton, the biology of belief I came across, right? And certain things that I actually did take into the world and changed. I'm going to start going for a walk. I'm going to start having one of these kale shakes instead of having just...
That's the doing bit, isn't it?
Start to do the doing, you know, and I started to cut off away from some negative circles that I was in and not... Do you know what I mean? And
100%.
I'm just having an epiphany here. I have listened and have learned and have done. Yeah, I'm still having an epiphany listening to you talk about listening. It's fucking madness.
And do you know what I think? Everybody tries to implement everything they hear.
Yeah, you can't
and then
do
you
that
become
either.
overwhelmed and then you do fuck all with it. So I always encourage, and the way I've worked for me is going, I'm going to listen to that 40-minute podcast and I'm going to take one thing. What's that one golden nugget I can take out of that I might actually do something with? You know, and sometimes there might be 3 or 4 and I'll write them down and I'll cross out the 3 that I'm not going to do and I'll just focus on the one. Because when we focus on one thing, there's a chance of it happening. When we focus on 3, 4, 5 things, we're fucked. You know,
keeping it real there.
Keeping it so simple. And I think people don't value simplicity. They want the quick fix or they want to make it happen overnight.
But there's an authenticity
not,
within that as well, because you've alluded to we're talking too much and there's a big cultural zeitgeist movement of it, like, and there is a bit of a hipster fucking, I'm vegan, I'm this, I'm that. There's a hipster kind of online wellness thing happening as well, isn't there? Where maybe authenticity, because if the authenticity isn't right, so we can all like repost the fucking Jordan Peterson thing and talk about how important your kids are, but are you doing that? Is that really what you're doing? And I think that's a great message that you're giving us.
On the subject of talking too much, Richie, I think we could talk all day, and I would love to carry this on forever. But I think you're doing amazing things. I've absolutely loved this chat,
It's
man.
been amazing.
It's been awesome.
Yeah,
been
it's
really
been
awesome
amazing.
for me, and Sam, you're taking a lot from it.
Oh, fucking huge.
But just to sort of summarise things, because I know you're doing amazing things. If anybody's listening that might have been struggling with some of the things you've mentioned, or want to check out what you're doing, can you just give us a bit of a summary about how they could maybe get in touch or get involved with some of the groups that you're doing? Or
so I work for an organisation called Epic Restart Foundation. We're a national charity who support people in recovery from gambling harm, and the whole purpose of that is to help people rebuild a positive life. You know, that's what it's about. It's a personal development program for people in recovery from gambling addiction. So if you do want to, you know, engage on any of the stuff around gambling, then feel free to follow Epic Restart Foundation on all your social channels. I also have my own pages, you know, Richie Paxton Counselling and Coaching. I do a little bit of private practice, not a lot, because I don't have that much time anymore. Yeah. But I'm always available if people want to reach out and ask questions. And, you know, we've got lots of different worksheets and workbooks that people can get for free. I'm quite happy to give that stuff away for free, you know, because anybody can get anything they want off the internet anyway. So it's all there. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So if you want a shortcut, I'll give you the shortcut, as in I'll give you the worksheet or the workbook or whatever it might be. But you've got to go and use it. You've got to go and do the work, you know. And I think that's where the magic happens. It's when you start doing the work. So yeah, I'm more than happy to speak to anybody at any time, and I've give up a bit of time.
Well, we'll link all that in, and I think if there is one or two people now, a couple of lads in a transit van driving to work who've had that long weekend where they've done them same crazy habits and they want a change, we can link to. Obviously, they've listened to this conversation, and now they can click a button and maybe get to some material that can actually help them narrate a path. That would be amazing.
We've just launched an app, an app that people can access. So I get some people don't want to identify as having a problem sometimes, you know. So if you just want to sit on the outside a little bit and see what goes on and, you know, engage in some stuff, then, you know, reach out and I can send you the link to the app and stuff like that, where there's free resources. And, you know, like you said, I've got the Recovery Toolkit podcast. You know, I think there's 20 odd episodes out there now, all people in recovery that have all got different tools and tips that have worked and helped them, you know. So
people help the people, don't they, Richie?
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, on that, one of my biggest values is help other people to help myself. And that value used to be, I want to help other people. And my coach at the time called us out on that, and he said, what do you get from helping other people? And I was like, oh no, it just makes feel all right, you know, it's the right thing to do, you know. And he was like, what else do you get? I was like, oh well, yeah, it makes feel great actually when other people get it and change. And he's like, so you're getting something? I was like, yeah. He's like, what else do you get? I was like, well, I get paid now as well, so that helps. And he was like, and there's nothing wrong with saying that, you know, I get paid to help other people. That's massively important. But if I didn't get paid, I would still be helping other people. Do you know what I mean?
It's just that bonus, isn't it?
The type of thing that we do, and come and doing chats like
and
this.
And that journey you've been on is what put you here, which is fucking amazing. And thank that old lady who put it in perspective for you, eh? More power to her.
Yeah, you know, and I spoke about Dylan, who I lost when I was 18, and that has to be my belief now, that, you know, he was the one that put her on the bridge and made us do what I'd done, you know, and that's my story. And whether people want to believe that or not, I couldn't go flying fuck. That's my story. So you go and create your own story.
Richie, you have been
honestly,
absolutely fantastic. We're really, really grateful for you to do this with us. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for your time, guys.
Big love, man.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
Richie.
Peace.